Most humans today are safer than at any point in history. There are no predators waiting in the dark, no sudden hunger, no cold nights without shelter. And yet, sleep has never been worse. Millions of people lie down exhausted, in quiet rooms, on comfortable beds, with nothing threatening them, and still the mind refuses to let go. This is not because something is wrong with you. It is not because you forgot how to rest. And it is not something that can be fixed quickly. What is happening is much older than modern life, and much slower than any solution you have been offered. You don't need to solve this tonight. You don't even need to understand all of it. Just let the idea settle that your body may already know what to do once nothing interferes, and that understanding can wait. For most of human history, sleep was not something people tried to do. It happened when the environment stopped demanding attention. When light faded, the body slowed. When sound disappeared, awareness followed. Sleep was not initiated by thought, effort, or intention. The human brain evolved to fall asleep only after certain signals were gone: danger, noise, light, uncertainty. Remove those signals, and sleep appeared on its own. This is how the nervous system learned to rest. But the modern world does not remove signals. It replaces them. Light no longer fades gradually. It turns on instantly. Sound does not disappear. It continues in the background. Information does not slow. It accelerates. The brain does not analyze this as modern life. It experiences it as unfinished business. And as long as something feels unfinished, the brain does not release control. This is why modern humans feel exhausted but remain awake, not because they lack sleep ability, but because the conditions that once allowed sleep no longer fully exist. The brain keeps waiting for quiet that never truly arrives. And when sleep does not come, this response is mistaken for failure. Wakefulness becomes something to fix. Rest becomes a task. But sleep cannot be commanded. The moment it is treated as something to achieve, the nervous system stays alert. What feels like poor sleep is often the brain doing exactly what it was designed to do: stay awake when the world does not clearly signal safety. Seeing this is not meant to solve the problem immediately, it is only meant to clarify it, because sleep was never lost. The space for sleep slowly disappeared. The human brain still expects night to arrive as a clear signal, not as a continuation. For most of human evolution, night meant a reduction of demands, fewer movements, fewer decisions, fewer things that required attention. Darkness was not simply the absence of light, it was information. It told the nervous system that the environment was becoming predictable, that threats were less likely, that action could be postponed. Night created a boundary. Day ended. Something else began. But in the modern world, that boundary has thinned almost to nothing. Night no longer removes stimulation. It reshapes it. Light remains present, only softer. Sound continues, only quieter. Information stays available, only slower. The brain does not recognize these as minor changes. It recognizes them as unfinished signals, and unfinished signals keep the nervous system engaged. When day never fully ends, night cannot fully begin. This is not a flaw in attention or discipline. It is a mismatch between expectation and reality. The brain is still waiting for the conditions it was trained to recognize. Instead, it receives partial versions of everything it associates with being awake. Even rest now contains activity. Even stillness contains information. A phone on a table is not silent to the nervous system. A screen that is off is still an object associated with alertness. The brain does not require active stimulation to stay awake. It only requires the possibility of it. And modern environments are built around constant possibility. At any moment, something could happen. A message could arrive. A sound could occur. A light could change. The brain does not distinguish between likely and unlikely when it comes to safety. It prepares for potential. This preparation is subtle. It does not feel like anxiety. It feels like low-level readiness. Muscles remain slightly engaged. Breathing stays a little shallow. Awareness does not fully narrow. This state is not exhausting in the short term, but over time, it prevents the nervous system from entering deeper rest. Sleep becomes lighter, fragmented, easier to interrupt, and when this pattern repeats night after night, the body begins to associate the bed itself with partial alertness. The place that once signaled shutdown becomes neutral, sometimes even activating. This shift happens gradually enough that it feels invisible. People notice the result, not the cause. They notice that they wake more easily, that thoughts return quickly, that rest does not feel complete. What they do not notice is that the brain never received a clear signal to disengage. In earlier environments, disengagement happened automatically because there was nothing left to respond to. Darkness reduced vision. Silence reduced orientation. Cold reduced movement. The environment cooperated with rest. Modern environments do not oppose rest directly. They simply do not support it. And the nervous system requires support. It does not shut down on command. It shuts down when stimulation falls below a certain threshold for long enough. When that threshold is never reached, sleep becomes shallow rather than absent. This is why many people technically sleep, but do not feel restored. The body enters rest briefly, then resurfaces over and over. Not because something is wrong, but because the brain is still monitoring, still waiting for a clearer signal that never arrives. Over time, this monitoring becomes habitual. The nervous system learns that night is not truly different. That being in bed does not guarantee safety or stillness. And once that association forms, it does not respond well to force. Sleep recedes further, not because it is stubborn, but because it is being watched. The brain cannot fully let go while it is evaluating its own state. This creates a quiet feedback loop. The more sleep is valued, the more attention is placed on it. The more attention is placed on it, the less naturally it occurs. Not immediately, but slowly. Enough that the problem feels personal, but it never was. It was environmental first, cultural second, individual last. Understanding this does not require action. It does not ask for solutions or adjustments. It simply reframes the experience. Poor sleep in the modern world is not a failure of the body. It is evidence that the body is still responding to the world as it was designed to, and that design has not changed nearly as fast as the environment surrounding it. When this is seen clearly, something subtle shifts. The pressure to fix sleep begins to loosen. The sense of fault fades slightly, and in that space, the nervous system has less to respond to, which is often the first quiet step toward deeper rest. Tiredness and sleep are often treated as the same thing, but to the nervous system, they are very different states. Fatigue simply means resources have been used. Sleep only happens when the system believes it is safe to disengage. A body can be exhausted and still remain alert if the environment does not clearly signal permission to shut down. This is why modern humans often feel drained all day, yet awake at night. The fatigue comes from constant demand, but the alertness comes from constant uncertainty. The brain interprets unfinished input as a reason to stay partially active. It does not wait for danger to appear. It waits for danger to disappear. And in modern life, that disappearance rarely feels complete. There is always something unresolved, even if it is abstract. A thought left unanswered. A message that could arrive. These are not urgent in any practical sense. But the nervous system does not measure urgency the way logic does. It measures openness. As long as something remains open, attention remains slightly engaged. This engagement is not loud. It does not feel like panic. It feels like background readiness, the kind that is easy to ignore during the day, but becomes noticeable at night when external distractions fade. As the environment quiets, internal signals become clearer. Thoughts that were once buried under activity rise to the surface, not because they are important, but because there is finally space for them to be noticed. The brain does not interpret this as rest. It interprets it as monitoring, and monitoring prevents deeper sleep. Over time, the body learns this pattern. Night becomes associated with thinking rather than disengaging. Bed becomes associated with awareness rather than release. This learning does not happen consciously. It happens through repetition. Each night of partial rest reinforces the expectation of partial rest. Each awakening teaches the nervous system that full shutdown may not be appropriate. This is why advice alone rarely helps. Telling the brain to relax does not change the signals it is responding to. The nervous system is not convinced by reassurance. It is convinced by consistency, by repeated experiences of safety without interruption. And those experiences have become rare. Even silence now contains anticipation. Even darkness contains light. Even stillness contains possibility. The brain remains oriented outward, scanning gently, without urgency but without rest. This state is sustainable for a time. Humans are adaptable, but adaptation has a cost. Sleep becomes lighter. Dreams become fragmented. Mornings arrive without a sense of completion. People begin to rely on stimulation to compensate. Caffeine replaces rest. Screens replace boredom. Activity replaces stillness. The cycle tightens. Daytime stimulation increases nighttime alertness. Nighttime alertness reduces daytime restoration. And the system never quite resets. What makes this pattern difficult to notice is that it feels normal. It develops slowly enough to blend into daily life. People forget what deep rest feels like. They adjust expectations. Waking tired becomes ordinary. Difficulty sleeping becomes common. And because it is common, it feels personal. But the pattern is shared across cultures and environments that prioritize constant availability. This suggests a systemic cause rather than an individual one. The human nervous system evolved for environments with natural endpoints. Day ended, activity stopped, darkness limited interaction, silence reduced orientation. Modern life removes endpoints. Activity can always continue. Interaction is always possible. Information never truly stops. Without endpoints, the nervous system does not know when to disengage. It waits. And waiting looks like wakefulness. This does not mean the brain is broken. It means it is cautious. It is doing exactly what it learned to do in uncertain environments. Staying alert kept humans alive. Letting go only happened when conditions were clearly stable. Those conditions are now ambiguous, not dangerous, but unclear. And ambiguity keeps the system active. Understanding this shifts the experience of poor sleep. It moves it away from self-blame, away from effort, away from urgency. Sleep does not respond well to urgency. It emerges when urgency fades, when nothing is required. And allowance begins with reducing interference, not increasing control. Many people attempt to solve sleep by adding structure, rules, and monitoring, but each addition is another signal for the brain to track. Another reason to stay engaged. The nervous system interprets effort as importance, and importance prevents release. This is why rest often arrives unexpectedly, during moments when attention drifts without intention, during times when nothing is being evaluated, during transitions where awareness softens naturally. Sleep follows the same principle. It arrives when the system forgets to watch itself. Modern environments make forgetting difficult, but not impossible. The first shift is not behavioral, it is perceptual. Seeing sleep as a response rather than a task changes the internal relationship to it. The pressure lessens, the monitoring softens, the system has less to respond to. The nervous system moves slowly. It trusts repetition more than insight. But insight can remove obstacles. It can stop unnecessary interference. It can reduce the sense that something must be done. And when nothing must be done, something else becomes possible. The body remembers patterns older than modern life. It remembers how to rest when conditions allow. Those patterns have not disappeared. They have only been overshadowed. When stimulation lowers gradually, when expectations loosen, when evaluation fades, the nervous system recognizes familiar territory. Rest deepens not through force, but through absence. Absence of urgency. Absence of unfinished signals. This is why sleep improves when the system feels unobserved, when nothing is required of it, when awareness is allowed to narrow without purpose. These conditions are subtle. They cannot be scheduled precisely, but they can emerge when interference decreases. Understanding this reframes the struggle. Poor sleep is not something to overcome. It is information. It reveals how closely the nervous system tracks its environment and how sensitive it remains to cues of safety and uncertainty. This sensitivity is not a weakness, it is a legacy, one that served humans well for most of history. And it still operates now, even when the world no longer aligns with it. Recognizing this does not demand action. It invites patience. It allows the system to settle at its own pace, and in that settling, rest can begin to appear again. Not as something achieved, but as something remembered. The nervous system begins to respond differently to the same environment, not because the environment has changed, but because the meaning attached to it has softened. It does not only react to what is present, but to what presence implies. When night is framed as a test, the body prepares. When it is framed as an opportunity, the body waits. But when it is framed as nothing in particular, the body relaxes. For most of human history, night carried no expectation beyond reduced activity. There was no outcome attached to it, no requirement to feel restored by morning, no measurement of depth or duration. Sleep happened, or it didn't, and life continued either way. This lack of pressure allowed the nervous system to fluctuate naturally. Some nights were lighter, some deeper. Variation was normal. Modern life removed that neutrality. Sleep became something to succeed at. The nervous system senses this distinction even when the mind does not articulate it. It responds to evaluation by maintaining readiness. This readiness is subtle. It does not feel like anxiety. It feels like awareness that does not fully dim. Eyes may close, but attention remains nearby. The body rests partially, but not completely. This partial rest accumulates over time. It creates the feeling of never quite arriving. Nights blend together, mornings feel unfinished. The system adapts by staying alert longer, assuming rest will not be reliable. This assumption becomes self-reinforcing. The brain learns from patterns, not intentions. Each night of fragmented sleep teaches it to expect fragmentation. Each effort to control sleep reinforces the idea that sleep requires supervision. The nervous system responds by staying involved. But there is another pattern beneath this one, older and quieter. A pattern that does not require improvement. It only requires space. The nervous system enters deep rest when it no longer detects demand. Demand does not only come from the environment, it comes from expectation, from anticipation, from monitoring internal states. Even the desire to rest can become a form of demand if it is held too tightly. This is why moments of unexpected rest feel different. They occur when attention drifts without purpose, when time is not being tracked, when nothing is being optimized. In these moments, the nervous system recognizes familiarity. It has been here before, long before schedules and screens and strategies. This recognition does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary. Breathing slows without instruction. Muscles soften without command. Thoughts lose urgency without resolution. The system does not decide to sleep. It simply stops staying awake. Modern environments make this transition less obvious, but not impossible. They add layers of stimulation, but layers can thin, not all at once, not through force, but through gradual reduction of interference. Interference includes not only noise and light, but meaning. The meaning assigned to being awake, the meaning assigned to lying still, the meaning assigned to time passing without progress. When these meanings soften, the nervous system has less to process, and when processing decreases, rest becomes more likely. This does not mean sleep will suddenly deepen. The nervous system does not reverse habits quickly. It tests conditions. It observes consistency. It looks for patterns of safety repeated without interruption. A deeper night followed by a lighter one, a sense of release followed by a return of alertness. This variability is not failure, it is recalibration. The system is relearning how to disengage without consequence. It is checking whether letting go is still appropriate. Each time it does so without interruption, the association strengthens. Over time, the threshold for rest lowers. Less quiet is needed, less darkness is required, less effort is involved. Sleep does not become perfect. It becomes natural again. Natural includes variation. It includes light nights and deep nights. It includes waking briefly and returning to rest without concern. When concern fades, awakenings shorten. Attention narrows more quickly. The body remembers how to drift without supervision. This remembering cannot be rushed. It does not respond to deadlines or goals. It responds to absence. Absence of urgency. Absence of evaluation. Absence of the need to change what is happening. This is why simply understanding the nature of poor sleep can be enough to begin shifting it. Understanding removes unnecessary struggle. It reduces the impulse to intervene. It allows nights to be what they are without added meaning. In that neutrality, the nervous system encounters something rare in modern life: non-demand. And non-demand is the strongest signal of safety it knows. Safety does not mean comfort. It means predictability. It means nothing unexpected is required. When the system senses this, it releases control gradually, not because it is told to, but because it no longer has a reason not to. This release feels subtle. It may be noticed as heavier limbs, or slower thoughts, or a loss of interest in maintaining awareness. These are not achievements. They are byproducts. They arise when nothing interferes. Modern discussions of sleep often focus on what to add. Add routines, add techniques, add supplements, but the nervous system responds more reliably to subtraction. Subtract urgency, subtract monitoring, subtract the idea that something must happen now. When less is required, less is monitored. And when less is monitored, the system relaxes. This relaxation is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It unfolds quietly, often unnoticed until rest has already begun. The body does not need permission to sleep. It needs permission not to stay awake. That permission is granted when the environment, both external and internal, stops asking for engagement. This is not something to practice. It is something to allow. Allowance begins with seeing that nothing is wrong. That poor sleep is not a personal shortcoming. It is a reasonable response to a world that rarely pauses. Seeing this removes the need to fight the experience, and when the fight ends, the system has less to defend against. Over time, this absence of conflict changes the internal landscape. Nights become less charged. Wakefulness loses its sharpness. Sleep becomes less of an event and more of a transition. It arrives not because it is summoned, but because nothing remains to hold it back. When nothing remains to hold sleep back, the nervous system begins to recognize a familiar rhythm that does not depend on instruction. This rhythm is older than language and older than intention. It does not respond to plans. It responds to conditions. When conditions are ambiguous, the rhythm hesitates. When conditions simplify, the rhythm resumes. Modern life rarely simplifies all at once. Instead, it fluctuates. Moments of quiet appear briefly, then disappear. The nervous system adapts by remaining partially engaged, never fully committing to rest. This partial engagement feels like being close to sleep without crossing into it. Eyes may close, thoughts may slow, but awareness stays near the surface. This state is not useless. It conserves energy, it protects against sudden demand, but it does not restore deeply. Over time, the body learns to rely on this lighter form of rest. Deep sleep becomes unfamiliar. When it does appear, it can feel disorienting. Waking from it may feel heavy rather than refreshing. This reaction can create hesitation. The system learns that deep rest is unpredictable, so it prefers what is controllable. Lighter sleep feels safer because it allows quick response. This preference is not conscious. It develops through repetition. Each interrupted night reinforces it. Each alert awakening confirms it. The nervous system is not seeking comfort. It is seeking predictability. Predictability allows release. In environments where signals constantly shift, predictability is scarce. Even routines do not guarantee it. A routine can be interrupted. A schedule can change. The system does not trust promises. It trusts patterns experienced without disruption. This is why rest improves slowly, often without clear cause. A few nights of quieter experience begin to form a pattern. The system notices. It tests further. It releases slightly more control. Then, if interruption returns, it tightens again. This back and forth is part of recalibration. It is not a setback. It is how learning occurs at the nervous system level. Learning here does not involve insight. It involves exposure without consequence, being allowed to disengage without something going wrong. Modern humans rarely experience this fully. Even during rest, anticipation remains. There is always the possibility of being needed by work, by messages, by thoughts themselves. Thoughts can act as internal demands. They signal unfinished processing. The nervous system responds to them as it would to external cues. It stays engaged. This is why quiet minds are not required for sleep. Quiet expectations are. Thoughts can be present without preventing rest if they are not treated as signals that require response. When thoughts lose urgency, they lose power. They pass through awareness without activating readiness. This shift cannot be forced. It emerges when the relationship to thinking changes. When thoughts are allowed without follow-up, the nervous system stops tracking them. It learns they are not instructions. Over time, this learning reduces nighttime alertness. The body does not need silence. It needs irrelevance. Sounds, sensations, and thoughts that are irrelevant to safety are gradually ignored. But relevance is learned. In modern environments, relevance is exaggerated. Alerts, notifications, and constant availability teach the nervous system that everything might matter. This learning extends into night. Even when devices are absent, the association remains. The system stays prepared. Undoing this learning takes time, not because it is difficult, but because it is deep. Deep learning does not change quickly. It changes through repeated experience of non-importance. Nights where nothing happens. Nights where being unreachable has no consequence. Nights where wakefulness is not punished by frustration. Each of these experiences slightly weakens the association between night and readiness. Over many repetitions, the association shifts. The nervous system becomes less vigilant by default. It does not abandon alertness entirely. It becomes flexible. Flexibility is the hallmark of health. Being able to engage when needed and disengage when not. Modern sleep difficulties often reflect a loss of flexibility rather than a loss of ability. The system is stuck in one mode. Alertness. Rest requires transition. Transition requires signals. When signals are unclear, transition stalls. This understanding reframes the goal. The goal is not to create perfect sleep. It is to restore flexibility, to allow the system to move between states without resistance. Flexibility returns when states are not judged. When being awake is not treated as failure. When rest is not treated as performance. Judgment adds pressure. Pressure signals importance. Importance keeps the system engaged. Removing judgment removes pressure. This does not mean welcoming sleeplessness. It means allowing it to exist without escalation. When wakefulness is allowed, it often shortens. When it is resisted, it extends. This paradox frustrates logical thinking, but it aligns with nervous system function. Systems disengage when they are no longer needed. Need is communicated through attention. Attention maintains engagement. When attention softens, engagement loosens. Over time, the body begins to trust that disengagement is acceptable, that nothing bad happens when awareness fades. This trust is rebuilt slowly. But it is rebuilt. The capacity for deep rest is not lost. It is inhibited. Inhibition responds to safety, not effort. Safety here does not mean comfort or control. It means absence of consequence, absence of demand, absence of urgency. These absences cannot be manufactured directly. They arise when conditions allow. Understanding this reduces interference. It stops unnecessary attempts to manage sleep. It allows nights to unfold without constant checking. Checking is a form of vigilance. Vigilance prevents rest. When checking decreases, rest becomes more likely. Not guaranteed, but possible. And possibility is enough. The nervous system does not require certainty. It requires room. Room for variability. Room for inconsistency. Room for nights that do not go as planned. In that room, flexibility returns. And with flexibility, deeper rest begins to appear more often. Not every night, not on demand, but reliably enough to be felt. Felt not as an achievement, but as a quiet familiarity, a sense that the body knows how to let go when nothing asks it to hold on. As the body remembers how to let go without being asked, something subtle begins to change in the way night is experienced. Night stops feeling like a problem to solve and starts feeling like a neutral space again, not peaceful, not perfect, just neutral, and neutrality is important because the nervous system relaxes most easily when nothing is being evaluated. Evaluation is a form of attention. Attention keeps systems online. When attention softens, systems power down naturally. For a long time, modern humans have been taught to watch themselves constantly, to monitor productivity, mood, health, performance. Sleep became part of this monitoring culture. People began to observe their nights the way they observe their days. How long it took, how deep it felt, how many times they woke. The nervous system does not understand this kind of observation as curiosity. It understands it as relevance. And relevance keeps it active. When night becomes something to measure, the system treats it as something important. Important things are not ignored. They are tracked. Tracked states do not dissolve easily. This is why the simple act of caring less can change the experience of rest. Not caring less in a dismissive way, but in a non-attached way, allowing the night to be what it is without commentary, without anticipation, without disappointment. This allowance removes a layer of stimulation that is rarely recognized. The stimulation of self-reference, thinking about how one is doing, keeps awareness turned inward. Inward attention is still attention. It still maintains activity. The nervous system rests most deeply when attention narrows, not when it turns inward to analyze. Narrowing happens when there is nothing compelling to track, no signal demanding interpretation, no outcome being awaited. In ancestral environments, this narrowing happened automatically. There was little to observe in darkness, few sounds, few movements. The mind had nowhere to go. So it went offline. Modern environments give the mind endless places to go, even in stillness. Memories, plans, imagined futures, unfinished conversations. These are not threats, but the nervous system does not categorize them precisely. It simply notes that something is happening. Something is being processed, and processing keeps it engaged. Over time, the system learns that night is a time of internal activity rather than disengagement. This learning does not require strong emotion. It develops quietly. It continues functioning, but at a cost. That cost is depth. Rest becomes shallow enough to maintain readiness. This readiness is useful in uncertain environments. It is not pathological. It is adaptive. The problem arises when adaptation becomes the default, when readiness persists even when it is no longer needed. At that point, the system is not malfunctioning. It is outdated. It is responding to a world that no longer matches its expectations. This mismatch is not resolved through instruction. It is resolved through experience. Through repeated nights where disengagement does not lead to negative consequence. Nights where nothing urgent happens while awareness fades. Nights where waking does not trigger frustration or urgency. Each of these experiences gently retrains the system. Retraining here does not mean changing behavior. It means changing association. The association between night and demand weakens. The association between night and neutrality strengthens. Over time, this shift alters the baseline. Sleep becomes easier to enter, not because conditions are perfect, but because resistance is lower. Resistance is costly. It keeps muscles slightly tense, breathing slightly shallow, attention slightly wide. When resistance drops, even slightly, the the system moves toward rest. This movement is gradual. It does not announce itself. People often notice it only in retrospect. A realization that they slept longer than expected, or that returning to sleep felt easier, or that wakefulness felt less sharp. These small changes indicate flexibility returning. Flexibility allows deeper states to appear more often, not consistently. Consistency is not required. The nervous system prefers reliability over regularity. Reliability means that rest is possible when conditions allow. Regularity implies schedule. Schedule implies expectation. Expectation implies pressure. Pressure keeps systems alert. Removing pressure does not require effort. It requires absence. Absence of commentary, absence of urgency, absence of the idea that something must happen now. This absence is uncomfortable at first. Modern minds are accustomed to engagement. Stillness without purpose can feel empty. Emptiness is often filled quickly, but if allowed to remain, emptiness becomes spacious. Spaciousness reduces stimulation. Reduced stimulation allows narrowing. Narrowing allows rest. This sequence cannot be forced. It unfolds when not interrupted. They wonder if sleep is coming. They evaluate progress. Each evaluation reintroduces engagement. Engagement resets the process. Understanding this pattern helps reduce interruption, not by trying to stop thoughts, but by recognizing that thoughts do not need response. Recognition alone can reduce follow-up. When thoughts are seen as activity rather than instruction, they lose urgency. The nervous system learns that not everything needs action. This learning extends beyond night. It affects how the system responds to demand during the day. Daytime engagement softens slightly. Reactivity decreases. This change supports nighttime rest indirectly. The nervous system is one system. It does not separate day and night as sharply as culture does. When overall demand decreases, rest improves. When overall vigilance drops, sleep deepens. This does not require lifestyle overhaul. It begins internally, with permission not to monitor, permission not to optimize, permission not to succeed at resting. These permissions remove layers of pressure that were never necessary. Pressure was added in an attempt to fix a problem, but the problem was not lack of effort, it was excess interference. Interference can be removed more easily than ability can be added. Ability is already present. The body knows how to sleep. It has always known. What it needs is space. Space created by non-demand. Non-demand does not mean neglect. It means neutrality, allowing nights to pass without narrative, without judgment, without goal. In this neutrality, the nervous system encounters a familiar landscape. One it has not forgotten. It recognizes the absence of urgency as safety. Safety allows disengagement. Disengagement allows rest. Rest, when it comes, does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, like something that was always supposed to happen. And when rest feels ordinary again, it no longer needs to be chased. It arrives when nothing is asking it to stay away. Modern humans do not sleep poorly because they lack rest time. They sleep poorly because the brain does not recognize the modern night as an ending. In evolutionary terms, sleep only happened when the brain detected that the period of potential threat had clearly closed. Darkness, silence, reduced movement, and reduced social contact all acted as signals that the environment was no longer demanding vigilance. These signals did not guarantee safety, but they reduced uncertainty enough for the nervous system to disengage. In the modern world, night removes very few uncertainties. Light remains available. Information remains accessible. Social contact remains possible. The brain reads this not as comfort, but as continuity. And continuity keeps vigilance active. This is the core reason modern sleep is fragile. The brain is not confused. It is cautious. It is waiting for a signal that never fully arrives. Even when the body is exhausted, the nervous system stays partially alert because the environment does not clearly communicate that monitoring is no longer necessary. This is why tiredness does not reliably convert into sleep. Fatigue is a resource problem. Sleep is a safety decision, and safety decisions depend on context, not effort. Modern context rarely provides closure. Tasks roll into the next day. Messages wait. Information never expires. Even personal thoughts remain open-ended. The brain interprets open-endedness as unresolved risk. Not dangerous risk, but unfinished risk. And unfinished risk keeps systems online. This is why modern humans often experience light, broken sleep rather than no sleep at all. The nervous system compromises. It rests just enough to function, but not enough to fully disengage. This compromise made sense in environments where sudden demand was possible. It still makes sense now, even if demand is psychological rather than physical. The problem is not that the brain is malfunctioning. The problem is that the signal structure of modern life contradicts the conditions under which sleep originally evolved. When night fails to clearly differ from day, the nervous system cannot justify shutting down completely. This is the same mechanism whether the stimulus is a phone, artificial light, constant connectivity, or internal anticipation. Different surface causes, same root signal. The day is not over. As long as the brain perceives the day as unfinished, sleep remains shallow and unstable. This is not solved by forcing rest, optimizing routines, or increasing fatigue. None of those change the core signal. They add effort on top of uncertainty, and effort itself becomes another form of vigilance. Modern sleep is poor because the brain never receives a reliable message that vigilance is no longer required. Modern humans sleep poorly because the brain never receives a clear signal that vigilance is no longer required. This is not a metaphor, it is a literal processing problem. The nervous system evolved to scan the environment for signs that risk has ended for the night. In the past, those signs were physical and unavoidable. Darkness, limited vision, silence, reduced information, distance separated individuals. When these signals aligned, the brain concluded that continued monitoring offered diminishing returns. At that point, sleep became efficient. In the modern world, these signals rarely align. Darkness is optional. Silence is incomplete. Distance has collapsed. The brain does not evaluate comfort or convenience. It evaluates closure. And closure is missing. This is why sleep quality declined, even as physical safety improved. Safety without closure still demands monitoring. The brain remains alert not because danger is present, but because the absence of danger is never confirmed. This distinction explains why modern sleep is light rather than absent. The nervous system does not fully refuse sleep. It limits depth. It allows rest while maintaining readiness. This compromise made sense when threats were intermittent. It still activates now, even though threats are abstract. The brain cannot differentiate between a predator and an unresolved obligation. Both represent unfinished states. Unfinished states keep systems engaged. This is the root mechanism behind poor modern sleep. Around every night, the same process repeats. The body slows, but the mind stays available. Muscles relax partially, but not completely. Breathing softens, but remains responsive. These are signs of a system that is resting while waiting. Waiting for what? For a signal that does not arrive. Modern nights do not clearly end the day. They pause it. Work continues mentally. Social availability persists. Information remains accessible. The brain reads this as continuity, not rest. This is why even people who fall asleep quickly often wake repeatedly. Each awakening is the nervous system checking whether conditions have changed. They usually have not. The environment still signals openness. So, sleep resumes lightly. Over time, this pattern trains the brain to expect interruption. Expectation becomes baseline. Baseline determines depth. When baseline vigilance is high, deep sleep becomes rare. Not because the body forgot how, but because the system does not authorize it. Authorization requires certainty. Certainty requires closure. Modern life does not provide closure at night. This is why sleep advice that focuses on comfort misses the point. Comfort does not equal closure. A comfortable environment that still signals availability keeps the system alert. Soft beds and quiet rooms help only if they contribute to a sense of ending. When they do not, their effect is limited. This same mechanism explains why people often sleep better in unfamiliar places under certain conditions. Not because the place is safer, but because it imposes closure. Travel disrupts routines, but it also removes ongoing obligations. There is nothing to respond to, no tasks waiting, no messages expected. The brain reads this as temporary containment. Containment reduces monitoring. Reduced monitoring allows deeper rest. This effect is not psychological in the usual sense. It is signal-based. The nervous system responds to boundaries. Modern life dissolves boundaries. Work enters home. Day enters night. Attention never fully retracts. Without retraction, sleep cannot deepen. This is why fatigue accumulates even with adequate time in bed. Time alone does not restore. Depth restores. Depth requires permission. Permission is granted by signals, not intention. Every few hundred words, it is important to return to the same cause because the cause is singular. Humans sleep poorly today because the brain does not receive a reliable stand-down signal. Everything else is secondary. Light, screens, stress, schedules, anxiety. These are not separate causes. They are different ways the same signal remains unresolved. They all communicate availability. They all suggest that something might still require response. The brain is conservative by design. When in doubt, it stays alert. Staying alert prevents deep sleep. This is not a disorder. It is correct functioning in an ambiguous environment. The problem is not inside the individual. It is between the nervous system and the structure of modern life. This also explains why effort backfires. Trying harder to sleep adds importance. Importance implies consequence. Consequence demands monitoring. Monitoring keeps the system active. The brain cannot disengage while evaluating success or failure. Sleep is incompatible with evaluation. Evaluation is a daytime function. When evaluation continues at night, sleep becomes shallow. This is why even positive goals about sleep reduce quality. The nervous system does not respond to goals. It responds to demands. Goals are demands framed politely. The system still tracks them. Tracking maintains vigilance. Vigilance limits rest. This loop is subtle but powerful. It is reinforced nightly. Breaking it does not require new techniques. It requires removal of false signals. Specifically, the signal that something must still happen. Modern humans often misinterpret poor sleep as personal weakness. This misinterpretation adds another layer of demand. The brain now monitors not only the environment, but itself. Self-monitoring is still monitoring. It consumes the same resources. It prevents the same disengagement. When sleep becomes identity-linked, pressure increases. Pressure reinforces alertness. Alertness prevents depth. The loop tightens. Again, the cause remains the same. No closure. No permission to stand down. No reliable signal that the day has ended. Historically, sleep did not need justification. It followed the environment. When the environment stopped, sleep followed. Today, the environment does not stop. It idles. Idling is not enough for the nervous system. It requires cessation. This is why modern sleep feels fragile. It depends on narrow windows where signals briefly align, a rare moment of quiet, a temporary sense of nothing pending. These moments allow deeper rest, but because they are rare and unpredictable, the brain does not rely on them. It stays prepared. Prepared systems do not rest deeply. They conserve energy instead. Conservation is not restoration. Over time, this distinction matters. To rest deeply, the brain must believe that nothing requires attention. This belief cannot be argued into existence. It must be signaled repeatedly. When signals are inconsistent, belief weakens. Modern life specializes in inconsistency. Constant updates, variable schedules, open-ended communication. These are incompatible with the conditions under which sleep evolved. The mismatch explains the outcome. Poor modern sleep is not mysterious. It is logical. It follows directly from how the nervous system works. Once this is understood, the struggle changes shape. The question is no longer, how do I sleep better? But why does my brain refuse to disengage? And the answer remains stable, because it has not been told, clearly and consistently that it no longer needs to stay alert. This understanding is not meant to solve the problem immediately. It clarifies responsibility. It removes blame. It shows that modern sleep issues are structural, not personal. When blame is removed, pressure decreases. When pressure decreases, one layer of vigilance dissolves. This does not fix sleep overnight. Not through force, but through subtraction. Subtract unresolved signals. Subtract unnecessary monitoring. Subtract the idea that sleep must be achieved. Each subtraction reduces vigilance slightly. Reduced vigilance allows deeper rest when conditions permit. And conditions permit rest more often than people realize once interference is reduced. At its core, the reason humans sleep so poorly in the modern world is simple and consistent. The brain never receives a clear message that it is safe to stop watching. Until that message exists, sleep will remain light, unstable, and fragmented. When that message begins to appear, even briefly, the nervous system responds the same way it always has. It lets go. Modern humans remain trapped in this pattern because the brain does not downgrade vigilance automatically. Vigilance is removed only when a stronger signal replaces it. In ancestral conditions, that signal was environmental shutdown. Darkness reduced visibility to near zero. Silence removed directional cues. Distance limited social obligation. These were not comforting features. They were conclusive features. They told the nervous system that monitoring no longer produced useful information. In the modern world, monitoring never becomes useless. There is always something that could change. A sound could occur. A message could arrive. A thought could resurface. The brain treats possibility as obligation. Obligation keeps vigilance active. This is the direct reason sleep in the modern world lacks depth. It is not that the brain cannot sleep. It is that it does not receive permission to stop watching. Every night, the nervous system performs a calculation. It asks whether continued alertness is still beneficial. In environments with clear endings, the answer eventually became no. In modern environments, the answer remains uncertain. Uncertainty defaults to alertness. This is not anxiety. It is baseline readiness. The body stays in a low-power monitoring mode. This mode conserves energy, but it does not restore fully. It allows function, not recovery. The system is not failing. It is adapting to a world that never closes. Adaptation, however, has a cost. The cost is depth. Depth requires certainty. Certainty requires closure. Closure is missing. This same mechanism explains why even long periods of rest do not guarantee good sleep. Time in bed is not the signal the brain is waiting for. Comfort is not the signal either. The brain does not equate softness with safety. It equates predictability with safety. Predictability means nothing unexpected is likely to occur. Modern life reduces predictability at night by extending daytime dynamics into darkness. Work follows people home. Social contact remains possible. Information remains active. The brain interprets this as continuity of the active phase. When the active phase never clearly ends, the rest phase never fully begins. This is the core failure point. Everything else is secondary. Around every few hundred words, it is necessary to return to this same root cause, because deviation weakens clarity. Humans sleep poorly today because the nervous system never receives a definitive stand-down signal. This is why interventions that focus on the body alone have limited effect. They address fatigue, not authorization. Sleep requires authorization. Authorization is granted by context, not technique. Techniques add structure. Structure can help only if it reduces ambiguity. Many modern techniques increase ambiguity by adding rules, tracking, and expectation. Expectation itself becomes a signal that something important is happening. Important events require monitoring. Monitoring prevents disengagement. The loop reinforces itself. The brain does not differentiate between external and internal demands. An unresolved thought functions the same way as an unresolved task. Both keep the system partially online. Modern humans carry their environment internally. Even when external stimulation is reduced, internal continuation remains. Plans, evaluations, imagined futures, unfinished narratives. These are not inherently problematic. They become problematic only when they are interpreted as requiring response. Response readiness keeps vigilance active. When vigilance remains active, sleep remains light. This is why attempting to silence thoughts is ineffective. Silence is not required. Irrelevance is. Thoughts can occur without preventing sleep if they are not treated as actionable. But modern conditioning teaches that thoughts matter. Matter implies consequence. Consequence implies monitoring. Monitoring blocks depth. Historically, night stripped experiences of consequence. There was little that could be done in darkness. Thought lost utility. The brain learned that disengagement carried minimal risk. That learning is still present. It is simply overridden by modern signals that suggest continued relevance. The nervous system is not confused. It is receiving conflicting inputs. Conflicting inputs default to caution. Caution equals alertness. Alertness equals shallow sleep. This chain is consistent and sufficient to explain modern sleep problems. No additional explanation is required. This also clarifies why sleep improves temporarily in environments that enforce closure. Power outages, remote locations, periods of enforced disconnection. These environments do not necessarily reduce stress. They reduce possibility. Reduced possibility lowers vigilance. Lower vigilance permits deeper rest. This effect disappears when possibility returns. The brain does not remember rest as a technique. It remembers it as a context. When context changes back, the system reverts. This demonstrates that sleep quality is not a fixed trait. It is a state dependent on signals. Signals can change without conscious intent. That is why rest can return unexpectedly, but unpredictability prevents trust. Trust forms only when the same signal repeats without negative outcome. Modern humans rarely experience repeated nights where nothing requires response. Even weekends carry anticipation. Even vacations maintain connectivity. The nervous system never experiences sustained non-demand. Without sustained non-demand, it cannot recalibrate baseline vigilance. Baseline remains elevated. Elevated baseline reduces sleep depth. Again, the same cause. Lack of closure, lack of stand-down signal. Understanding this reframes responsibility. The individual is not failing to sleep. The environment is failing to close. This distinction matters because it removes self-directed pressure. Self-directed pressure is itself a vigilance signal. Removing it reduces interference. Reduced interference does not guarantee sleep, but it makes sleep possible. Possibility is enough. The nervous system does not require certainty, it requires absence of contradiction. When signals stop contradicting disengagement, disengagement occurs. This does not mean modern humans must recreate ancient conditions. It means recognizing that the nervous system operates on a different logic than modern culture assumes. Culture values availability. The nervous system values withdrawal. Sleep is withdrawal. Withdrawal requires permission. Permission is communicated through consistent absence of demand. As long as demand remains possible, even abstractly, permission is withheld. This is why modern sleep feels conditional and fragile. It depends on rare moments when demand perception drops low enough. Those moments are unpredictable. Unpredictability reinforces vigilance. The loop continues. The root cause remains singular. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain is never informed that vigilance is no longer necessary. Every mechanism discussed traces back to this point. Light, noise, information, obligation, self-monitoring, all communicate continuity. Continuity blocks disengagement. Until continuity ends, sleep will not deepen reliably. This understanding does not require action. It requires recognition. Recognition reduces blame. Reduced blame reduces pressure. Reduced pressure lowers vigilance slightly. Slight reductions accumulate. Over time, the nervous system begins to notice that nothing collapses when monitoring softens. That noticing is how trust rebuilds. Trust allows release. Release allows depth. Depth restores. Sleep does not need to be fixed. It needs the same thing it has always needed. A clear signal that the day is over and nothing is required. Until the modern world provides that signal consistently, poor sleep is not a mystery. It is an expected outcome of how the human nervous system works. Modern sleep remains poor because the nervous system still waits for a definitive end-of-duty signal, and modern life never delivers it. This is not psychological weakness, it is signal logic. The brain disengages only when continued monitoring becomes useless. In ancestral nights, usefulness dropped sharply. Vision collapsed. Interaction ceased. Movement slowed. Monitoring produced little information, so the system powered down. In modern nights, usefulness never drops to zero. There is always potential input. Potential is enough to keep vigilance alive. This single mechanism explains why sleep becomes light, fragmented, and easily interrupted. Watching prevents depth. Depth requires closure. Closure is missing. Consider how obligation behaves at night now. Obligation used to end with daylight. Today it persists abstractly. Deadlines roll forward. Conversations remain open. Decisions wait. Even leisure carries expectation. The brain does not categorize these as benign. It reads them as unresolved. Unresolved equals unfinished. Unfinished equals monitoring. Monitoring equals shallow sleep. This chain does not require stress or anxiety. It operates under calm conditions. That is why people report being relaxed, yet unable to sleep deeply. Relaxation reduces arousal, not vigilance. Vigilance is removed only by certainty that nothing requires response. Modern environments rarely provide certainty. They provide comfort without conclusion. Comfort without conclusion does not authorize shutdown. This same cause explains why sleep onset can be easy while maintenance fails. Falling asleep requires a brief drop in input. Staying asleep requires sustained absence of demand. Modern nights rarely sustain it. A sound, a vibration, a remembered task, a time check. Each is interpreted as potential relevance. The system wakes lightly to assess. Assessment finds nothing urgent, so sleep resumes, but only partially. Expectation raises baseline vigilance. Raised baseline reduces depth. Again, the cause is unchanged. The brain never receives a reliable stand-down signal. Every 300-500 words, it matters to restate the route plainly. Humans sleep poorly today because the nervous system does not detect the end of monitoring. Everything else is surface. Techniques fail when they do not address authorization. Authorization is contextual. It comes from boundaries. Boundaries have eroded. Night no longer marks an ending. It marks a dimmer continuation. Dimmer continuation keeps supervision online. Supervision blocks deep rest. Self-monitoring worsens this because it duplicates the same signal internally. Tracking sleep quality, timing, stages, progress all communicate importance. Importance demands attention. Attention sustains vigilance. Vigilance thins sleep. This is why attempts to optimize rest often degrade it. The nervous system responds to what matters, not to what helps. When sleep is made to matter, it becomes monitored. Monitored states do not dissolve. Internal demand behaves exactly like external demand. A thought labeled needs resolving functions like a task. The brain prepares to act. Preparation maintains readiness. Readiness limits rest. Historically, thought lost leverage at night because action was constrained. Now, action remains possible. Thought retains leverage. The system stays ready. The cause remains the same. Lack of closure. This also clarifies why forced fatigue does not solve the problem. Exhaustion increases need for rest, but does not grant permission. Permission depends on certainty, not need. The brain will trade depth for readiness if certainty is absent. It always has. That trade-off preserved survival. It still executes now. Poor sleep is the price of constant possibility. Return again to the cause. The modern night does not tell the brain that nothing remains to be done. Without that message, sleep cannot deepen reliably. Solutions that add rules, rituals, or goals often add signals. Added signals increase ambiguity. Increased ambiguity sustains vigilance. The correct direction is subtraction of signals that imply relevance. Subtraction reduces monitoring. Reduced monitoring allows authorization. Authorization does not require silence or darkness alone. It requires predictability that nothing will require response. Predictability forms through repetition. Repetition requires consistency. Modern life undermines consistency by design. Connectivity collapses distance. Availability collapses endpoints. The brain adapts by staying on watch. Another restatement within range. Humans sleep poorly because the brain never confirms that vigilance can safely end. This is why improvement appears in contexts that enforce non-availability. When response is impossible, monitoring loses utility. Utility loss authorizes disengagement. Disengagement allows depth. Remove impossibility and depth recedes. The mechanism is stable. This understanding reframes responsibility. The individual is not defective. The signal environment is incompatible with evolved thresholds for shutdown. Removing blame removes one signal. Fewer signals reduce monitoring slightly. Slight reductions accumulate. Accumulation allows trust. Trust allows deeper rest when conditions permit. Trust is not belief. It is learned absence of consequence. The nervous system tests. If I disengage, does something require me? When the answer is repeatedly no, baseline vigilance drops. Modern nights rarely deliver repeated no's. Even rare interruptions reset the test. The system remains conservative. Conservative systems sleep lightly, return to the root once more. No stand-down signal, no deep sleep. Until the day clearly ends, the night cannot begin. Clarity, not comfort, is the requirement. Comfort without clarity is insufficient. Understanding does not force sleep. It removes obstacles. Obstacles are signals that imply relevance. Remove them, and the system moves toward rest on its own timetable. That timetable is slow because learning is slow, but the direction is reliable. Reduced monitoring precedes deeper sleep. In summary, the central cause remains singular and sufficient. Modern humans sleep poorly because the brain is never told, clearly and consistently, that vigilance is no longer necessary. All contributing factors operate by sustaining that uncertainty. Address uncertainty and sleep improves. Ignore it, and sleep remains fragile. This is not advice. It is mechanism, and mechanisms do not argue, they execute. The persistence of poor sleep in the modern world can be traced back, again and again, to the same unresolved mechanism. The brain is never clearly released from duty. In biological terms, vigilance is the default state whenever the cost of missing information might exceed the cost of staying alert. Messages matter. Updates matter. Thoughts matter. Possibility itself matters. As long as information retains value, the nervous system keeps channels open. Open channels prevent full shutdown. This is why sleep today is not absent, but thin. The system compromises. It rests while listening. Listening prevents depth. Depth requires the conclusion that listening is no longer useful. That conclusion is rarely reached. In ancestral conditions, the value of information dropped sharply at night. Darkness reduced visual input to near zero. Distance reduced social input. Silence reduced directional cues. Monitoring produced diminishing returns. At that point, vigilance became inefficient. The nervous system powered down because staying alert no longer improved outcomes. Sleep evolved not as a reward for effort, but as an efficiency decision. When monitoring stopped paying off, rest became the optimal state. Modern environments never allow monitoring to become inefficient. There is always potential return. A notification might arrive. A thought might connect to action. Potential return sustains vigilance. Sustained vigilance suppresses deep sleep. The cause remains unchanged. Modern humans often mistake this for overstimulation alone. But stimulation is not the core problem. Relevance is. Stimulation that is clearly irrelevant does not block sleep. A distant, meaningless sound is ignored. A familiar, low-risk sensation fades. Information is contextual. Availability is expected. The brain adapts correctly by staying ready. That readiness persists into the night because relevance does. Without a clear boundary where relevance collapses, the nervous system cannot justify disengagement. This is why sleep quality declines even in quiet, comfortable settings. Comfort does not negate relevance. Relevance is cognitive, not sensory. Every few hundred words, it is necessary to return to the root. Humans sleep poorly because the brain never receives confirmation that monitoring can end. Light, noise, stress, screens, these are not separate causes. They are different carriers of the same message. Stay available. As long as availability is implied, vigilance remains active. Vigilance and deep sleep are incompatible states. One must give way to the other. Modern life consistently favors vigilance. This mechanism also explains why sleep fragmentation increases with age. As responsibility accumulates, relevance increases. More depends on response. More outcomes feel contingent. The nervous system tracks this increased relevance. It does not relax simply because the body is tired. It relaxes only when relevance drops. Modern aging rarely includes relevance reduction. Retirements still carry connectivity. Social roles persist. Information access remains constant. The brain does not see an endpoint. It stays on watch. Poor sleep follows logically. Another return to the cause. No endpoint, no shutdown. The modern night lacks finality. It pauses activity without closing it. Pauses do not authorize rest. Endings do. The nervous system evolved to respond to endings. Without them, it waits. This waiting state is metabolically cheaper than full alertness, but more expensive than deep rest. Over years, the cost accumulates. People adapt by functioning under-recovered. This adaptation masks the problem. The body copes, so the cause is obscured. Coping is not recovery. Recovery requires depth. Depth requires certainty. Certainty requires closure. Closure is missing. Attempts to manufacture closure often fail because they operate symbolically rather than signal-wise. Routines, rituals, and schedules can help only if they convincingly reduce relevance. If a routine still implies future obligation, it fails. If a ritual is monitored for effectiveness, it fails. Monitoring reinstates relevance. The nervous system does not respond to intention. It responds to signal weight. Signal weight is determined by consequence. As long as consequence remains possible, signal weight remains high. This also explains why sleep improves temporarily when consequence truly disappears. During severe illness, when nothing is expected. During enforced isolation, when response is impossible. During power outages, when systems go offline, these conditions reduce relevance sharply. Monitoring loses value. The nervous system disengages. Sleep deepens. When consequence returns, vigilance returns. The pattern is consistent. Return again to the central answer. Modern humans sleep poorly because the brain is never told that vigilance is no longer useful. The environment continuously contradicts disengagement. Contradiction sustains alertness. Alertness thins sleep. Understanding this reframes intervention. The question is not how to induce sleep, but how to reduce perceived relevance at night. Relevance is not reduced by effort. Effort signals importance. Importance increases relevance. The reduction must be structural or interpretive. Structural reduction removes actual demands. Interpretive reduction removes assumed demands. Both reduce monitoring. Reduced monitoring allows authorization. Authorization allows depth. Interpretive reduction begins with recognizing that many nighttime signals are non-consequential. Recognition alone can lower signal weight. When a thought is seen as not requiring action, its relevance drops. When relevance drops, vigilance drops slightly. Slight drops accumulate. Accumulation shifts baseline. Baseline determines sleep depth. This is not immediate. Learning at the nervous system level requires repetition without consequence. Nights where nothing happens despite disengagement. Modern life rarely provides many such nights. Another return to the cause within range: lack of a stand-down signal. Until the brain perceives that nothing depends on continued alertness, it will not fully disengage. This is not stubbornness, it is cost-benefit logic embedded in biology. Deep sleep is risky if information still matters. The brain errs on the side of caution. It always has. This also clarifies why reassurance alone is insufficient. Being told it is safe does not remove relevance. Safety is not the same as irrelevance. A safe task can still require response. The nervous system disengages when response is unnecessary, not merely safe. Modern environments rarely make response unnecessary. They make it optional. In summary, the repeated answer remains the same because the mechanism is singular. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain never receives a clear, consistent signal that vigilance can end. The night does not close the day. Availability persists. Relevance remains high. Monitoring continues. Sleep stays light. All other explanations are variations of this core signal failure. Until relevance collapses at night, deep sleep will remain fragile. Understanding this removes confusion. It does not demand action. It clarifies why the problem exists and why it persists. And clarity itself reduces one layer of unnecessary vigilance, allowing the nervous system to begin, slowly, to loosen its grip. Modern sleep remains fragile because the brain never receives a decisive signal that its role as a watcher is complete. This is the central cause, and it does not change with context. The nervous system evolved to disengage only when vigilance no longer produced useful information. In environments with clear endings, usefulness dropped at night. In modern environments, usefulness never collapses. Availability persists. Relevance persists. Monitoring continues. Sleep therefore stays light. This is not a failure of will or habit. It is a rational response to signals that never resolve. At night, the brain does not ask whether danger is present. It asks whether attention is still required. Modern life answers yes, indirectly and continuously. Tasks remain open. Communication channels remain active. Information remains current. Even leisure carries expectation. The nervous system treats expectation as demand. Demand sustains readiness. Readiness blocks depth. This is why modern humans often sleep, but do not restore. The system allows minimal disengagement while keeping a channel open. That compromise conserves function, not recovery. Every few hundred words, the same cause must be stated plainly. Humans sleep poorly because the brain is never told, clearly and consistently, that vigilance is no longer necessary. All contributing factors reinforce this message. Artificial light extends visibility. Connectivity extends obligation. Self-monitoring extends relevance inward. Each extension prevents closure. Without closure, sleep cannot deepen. This mechanism explains why nights feel similar to days, only dimmer. Dimness is not an ending. It is a reduction. Reductions do not authorize shutdown. Endings do. Historically, night ended activity. Today, night attenuates it. The nervous system does not respond to attenuation with full disengagement. It responds with caution. Caution is vigilance at lower power. Lower power vigilance still suppresses deep sleep. The brain is not confused. It is conservative. The same cause explains why brief improvements fail to hold. A quiet evening, a calm routine, a comfortable bed may reduce input temporarily. But if relevance remains, if something could still matter, the system resumes monitoring. Depth returns only in windows where relevance truly collapses. These windows are rare and unpredictable. Unpredictability prevents trust. Trust is required for consistent depth. Without trust, the nervous system hedges. Return to the cause again. Lack of a stand-down signal. The brain disengages when monitoring yields no benefit. Modern nights never make monitoring useless. There is always potential benefit, Potential alone sustains vigilance. This is why reassurance fails. Being told it is safe does not remove potential benefit. Safety is not irrelevance. The system needs irrelevance to disengage. Internal demand behaves the same way as external demand. An unresolved thought carries potential consequence. Potential consequence sustains attention. Attention sustains vigilance. Vigilance thins sleep. This is why trying to empty the mind fails. Emptiness is not required. Non-consequence is. Thoughts can occur without blocking sleep if they are not treated as requiring action. Modern conditioning teaches the opposite. Thoughts are framed as signals to process. Processing maintains engagement. Engagement blocks depth. The cause remains the same. Relevance never collapses. Another restatement within range. Humans sleep poorly because the modern night does not end the day. It suspends it. Suspension keeps responsibility alive. Responsibility keeps the nervous system online. Online systems do not rest deeply. This also explains why adding structure often backfires. Structure can help only if it convincingly removes relevance. When structure is evaluated, tracked, or optimized, it increases relevance. Increased relevance increases vigilance. Increased vigilance reduces depth. The nervous system responds to consequence, not intention. When sleep is made important, it is monitored. Monitored states persist. Unmonitored states dissolve. The biological logic is consistent. Deep sleep is risky when information still matters. The brain evolved to trade depth for readiness under uncertainty. Modern life maximizes uncertainty at night by preserving possibility. Possibility sustains readiness. Readiness suppresses depth. This is sufficient to explain the phenomenon without additional causes. Return again to the root. No endpoint, no shutdown. Endpoints are signals that nothing further will be required. Modern systems avoid endpoints. They favor continuity. Continuity is valuable for productivity. It is incompatible with evolved sleep thresholds. The mismatch produces poor sleep. The individual bears the experience. But the cause is structural. This understanding reframes expectations. The goal is not perfect sleep. The goal is restoring conditions under which vigilance can drop. Vigilance drops when relevance drops. Relevance drops when consequence disappears. Consequence disappears when response is unnecessary. At night, modern life rarely makes response unnecessary. It makes it optional. Optional still implies relevance. Relevance sustains monitoring. Interpretive shifts can reduce assumed relevance. When a signal is seen as non-consequential, its weight decreases. Decreased weight reduces monitoring slightly. Slight reductions accumulate. Accumulation lowers baseline vigilance. Lower baseline allows deeper rest when conditions permit. This process is slow because the nervous system learns through repetition without consequence. Nights where disengagement produces no negative outcome. Modern life offers few such nights. Even small reductions matter. Another return to the cause within range. The brain never receives a reliable message that vigilance can end. Until that message exists, sleep will remain light and fragmented. This is why improvement is uneven. Trust rebuilds gradually. The system tests disengagement cautiously. Any interruption resets the test. Conservatism persists. Understanding removes one major obstacle: self-blame. Blame adds pressure. Pressure adds relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. Removing blame removes a signal. Fewer signals reduce monitoring. Reduced monitoring allows authorization. Authorization precedes depth. Depth restores. Authorization cannot be forced. It is granted when signals align. Alignment means that relevance collapses across channels, external and internal. This alignment is rare, but not impossible. When it occurs, sleep deepens naturally, not because of effort, but because the cost-benefit calculation changes. In summary, the explanation remains singular and stable. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain is never clearly released from duty. The night does not communicate closure. Availability persists. Relevance persists. Sleep remains shallow. All interventions succeed or fail based on whether they reduce perceived relevance. When relevance drops, vigilance drops. When vigilance drops, sleep deepens. Until relevance collapses reliably at night, poor sleep is not a mystery. It is the expected outcome of how the human nervous system evaluates when it is safe to stop watching. Modern sleep problems persist because the brain remains assigned to watch, even when the body lies still. This assignment is never formally revoked. In biological terms, disengagement only occurs when the nervous system determines that continued vigilance offers no advantage. In the modern world, advantage never drops to zero. Information remains relevant. Response remains possible. The brain therefore stays partially active. This is the direct reason sleep lacks depth today. Not because humans are overstimulated, but because the system never receives confirmation that monitoring can end. Night used to collapse relevance. Darkness meant fewer choices. Silence meant fewer cues. Distance meant fewer obligations. Monitoring lost value. In contrast, modern nights preserve value. Work can resume instantly. Social contact can reappear. Information can update at any moment. The nervous system interprets this as ongoing responsibility. Responsibility sustains readiness. Readiness suppresses deep sleep. This single mechanism is sufficient to explain the pattern across cultures and technologies. The cause does not vary. Only the carriers of the signal vary. Around every few hundred words, the cause must be stated clearly. Humans sleep poorly because the brain never receives a reliable stand-down signal. Everything else, light, screens, stress, schedules, operates by keeping relevance alive. Relevance keeps vigilance alive. Vigilance thins sleep. The brain is not evaluating comfort. It is evaluating consequence. Comfort can exist alongside consequence. A soft bed does not remove the possibility that something matters. The nervous system prioritizes what might require response, not what feels pleasant. This is why sleep remains fragile even in ideal physical conditions. Fragility is the expected outcome when consequence persists. The system chooses readiness over depth. This logic explains why sleep can improve abruptly when consequence truly disappears. Situations where response is impossible. Remote travel, enforced disconnection, natural disasters that suspend ordinary roles often produce deeper rest despite discomfort. Discomfort does not prevent sleep if relevance collapses. Relevance collapse authorizes disengagement. Authorization allows depth. When relevance returns, vigilance returns. The effect fades. The mechanism is consistent. Return again to the cause. No endpoint, no shutdown. Modern life avoids endpoints. It favors continuity. Continuity is efficient for systems. It is incompatible with evolved sleep thresholds. The nervous system evolved to disengage when systems ended. When systems idle instead, disengagement stalls. Sleep becomes light and interruptible. This also clarifies why tracking sleep worsens it. Tracking signals importance. Importance implies consequence. The nervous system does not distinguish helpful attention from harmful attention. Attention is attention. It keeps channels open. Open channels prevent shutdown. When sleep is monitored, it remains active. When it is ignored, it dissolves more easily. Ignoring here does not mean neglect. It means non-evaluation. Non-evaluation reduces relevance. Reduced relevance lowers vigilance. Internal narratives function the same way. An unresolved thought is a pending obligation. Pending obligations keep the system alert. Historically, thought lost leverage at night because action was constrained. Now action remains possible. Thought retains leverage. The brain stays ready. Attempts to suppress thought fail because suppression adds importance. Importance increases relevance. The correct variable is consequence, not content. Thoughts that carry no consequence do not block sleep. Modern conditioning assigns consequence to many internal signals. That assignment sustains vigilance. Another restatement within range. Humans sleep poorly because the modern night never convincingly tells the brain that nothing requires attention. Without that message, the brain hedges. Hedging produces shallow sleep. This mechanism explains age-related changes as well. As responsibilities accumulate, perceived consequence increases. Increased consequence sustains vigilance. Sleep thins. Retirement does not always restore sleep, because relevance often persists through connectivity and expectation. The nervous system tracks relevance, not employment status. Where relevance remains, vigilance remains. Effort fails because it adds relevance. Trying to sleep implies outcome importance. Outcome importance implies consequence. Consequence implies monitoring. Monitoring prevents disengagement. The nervous system cannot both evaluate and release. Evaluation is a daytime function. When evaluation continues at night, sleep remains partial. This is not a paradox. It is biology. Return again to the root. Lack of a stand-down signal. The brain disengages when monitoring yields no benefit. Modern nights preserve benefit. The brain stays on watch. Interventions succeed only when they reduce perceived relevance. Structural reductions remove actual demands. Interpretive reductions remove assumed demands. Both lower vigilance. Lower vigilance permits authorization. Authorization precedes depth. Depth restores. None of this requires force. Force increases relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. Interpretive reduction begins with accurate attribution. Poor sleep is not personal failure. It is correct system behavior under ambiguous signals. Removing blame removes one demand. Fewer demands reduce monitoring. Reduced monitoring allows deeper rest when conditions permit. This is slow because learning requires repetition without consequence. Nights where disengagement produces no negative outcome. Modern life provides few such nights, but even partial reductions matter. Another return within range. The brain never receives a clear message that vigilance can end. Until it does, sleep will remain light and fragmented. This is why improvement is uneven. The system tests disengagement cautiously. Interruptions reset the test. Conservatism persists. Conservatism is adaptive. Clarity reduces unnecessary vigilance. When the mechanism is understood, the impulse to fix softens. Reduced engagement lowers relevance slightly. Slight reductions accumulate. Accumulation shifts baseline. Baseline determines depth. Baseline vigilance drops only after repeated confirmation that nothing collapses when attention fades. This confirmation cannot be argued into existence. It must be experienced. Experience arrives when signals align to indicate non-demand. Alignment may be partial. Partial alignment still helps. The nervous system responds proportionally. Small drops in vigilance allow small increases in depth. Over time, these increases become noticeable. Return again to the cause. No closure, no deep sleep. Closure is not silence or darkness alone. It is the absence of consequence. Consequence persists in modern nights through availability and expectation. Until consequence collapses, vigilance persists. Understanding does not demand lifestyle overhaul. It reframes the problem. The problem is not insufficient technique. It is excessive relevance. Reducing relevance externally or internally addresses the cause directly. When relevance drops, the brain authorizes disengagement. When authorization occurs, sleep deepens without instruction. In summary, the explanation remains singular and sufficient. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain is never clearly released from duty. The night does not end the day. It dims it. Dimming preserves relevance. Preserved relevance sustains vigilance. Sustained vigilance thins sleep. All observed patterns follow from this logic. Remove relevance, and sleep returns. Preserve relevance, and sleep remains fragile. This is not opinion. It is how the nervous system decides when it is safe to stop watching. When the brain begins to accept that nothing needs to be answered tonight, the shift does not feel dramatic. There is no clear moment of release. What changes first is the calculation running quietly in the background. The nervous system starts to weigh vigilance differently. It notices that monitoring is producing less return. Nothing new appears. No consequence follows reduced attention. This observation matters because the brain learns through outcome, not intention. Each minute that passes without demand slightly weakens the assumption that staying alert is necessary. This is how shutdown actually begins in the modern world, not as sleep itself, but as a downgrade of urgency. And urgency is the core variable. When urgency drops, vigilance loosens. When vigilance loosens, sleep can deepen. This directly answers the central question again. Humans sleep poorly because urgency never fully disappears at night. When urgency finally begins to fade, even partially, sleep quality improves. In modern life, urgency is rarely external at night. It is internalized. The brain carries the day forward as unfinished processing. Tasks may be paused, but they are not closed. Conversations may stop, but they are not resolved. Even leisure activities leave traces of expectation. The nervous system does not require active stress to stay alert. It only requires open loops. Open loops imply possible consequence. Possible consequence sustains readiness. When some of these loops quietly close, when the brain notices that nothing happens, despite not attending to them, urgency reduces. This reduction is subtle, but it is cumulative. Over repeated nights, the system learns that disengagement does not lead to loss. This learning is what modern sleep lacks most. Repeated confirmation that nothing is required. As urgency declines, the body responds before the mind does. Breathing lengthens slightly. Muscle tone drops without instruction. The field of attention narrows. These are not techniques. They are automatic responses to reduced demand. The nervous system is always adjusting its output based on perceived necessity. When necessity decreases, output follows. Sleep depth increases not because the person tries to sleep, but because the system sees less reason to stay awake. This is why forcing sleep is ineffective. Force signals importance. Importance raises urgency. Urgency sustains vigilance. The loop reinforces itself. The correct direction is the opposite. Remove urgency and vigilance dissolves on its own. This brings the explanation back to the root again within range. Modern humans sleep poorly because the brain never fully accepts that vigilance can end for the night. Acceptance does not come from reassurance. It comes from evidence. Evidence that nothing collapses when attention fades. Modern environments rarely provide that evidence consistently. Notifications, responsibilities, and internal monitoring interrupt the learning process. Each interruption resets the calculation. The nervous system returns to caution. Sleep lightens. When shutdown begins to occur, it does not feel like falling asleep immediately. It feels like caring less about time, less about outcome, less about whether sleep is happening. This reduction in caring is not indifference. It is relevance dropping. Relevance is the driver of vigilance. When relevance drops, monitoring becomes inefficient. Inefficient monitoring is abandoned by the nervous system automatically. This is the same principle that governed sleep in ancestral environments. When darkness removed usefulness from watching, the system powered down. The mechanism has not changed. Only the signals have. In the modern world, shutdown is fragile because relevance returns quickly. A thought arises and is interpreted as important. A sound is checked for meaning. A sensation is evaluated. Each evaluation adds relevance back. Vigilance rises again. Sleep lightens. This does not mean shutdown failed. It means the system is cautious. Caution is adaptive. The problem is not caution itself, but how often it is triggered unnecessarily. Reducing unnecessary triggers is the only path toward deeper rest. Not eliminating all triggers, but lowering their perceived consequence. This is why the brain responds better to consistency than to intensity. One perfectly quiet night does little, if followed by many interrupted ones. Consistency teaches the system what to expect. Expectation determines baseline vigilance. When expectation is that nothing requires response at night, baseline vigilance drops. When expectation is uncertain, baseline stays high. Modern life teaches uncertainty. Uncertainty keeps sleep shallow. This again answers the central question. Poor modern sleep is the result of learned uncertainty about nighttime demand. As shutdown deepens, thoughts do not need to disappear. They lose authority. Authority is what keeps them activating. A thought without authority is just activity. Activity without consequence does not require response. Ignoring here is not suppression. It is non-engagement. Engagement signals relevance. Non-engagement signals irrelevance. Irrelevance allows disengagement. This sequence is mechanical. It does not require insight once learned, but learning takes time. Modern humans often interrupt this learning by checking whether shutdown is happening. Checking is engagement. Engagement raises relevance. Relevance raises vigilance. Vigilance blocks shutdown. The paradox is consistent. The more sleep is watched, the less it deepens. The less it is watched, the more it is allowed to emerge. This does not mean neglecting rest. It means removing it from evaluation. Evaluation is the enemy of disengagement. Return again to the root within range. The brain sleeps poorly in the modern world because it is never clearly told that nothing needs attention. Shutdown begins only when the system starts to believe this is true. Belief here is not intellectual. It is experiential. It is learned through nights where nothing happens when vigilance fades. These nights are rare, but even partial experiences count. Partial reduction in urgency produces partial improvement in sleep depth. Improvement does not need to be total to matter. As the system begins to shut down more often, the threshold for shutdown lowers. Less quiet is needed. Less certainty is required. The nervous system becomes more flexible. Flexibility is health. It allows the system to disengage even in imperfect conditions. Modern sleep problems are largely problems of inflexibility caused by chronic uncertainty. Restore flexibility, and sleep improves naturally. Flexibility returns when the system is no longer punished for disengaging. This punishment is usually internal. Frustration, judgment, self-monitoring. These reactions increase relevance. Increased relevance increases vigilance. Vigilance blocks shutdown. Removing punishment removes relevance. This is why understanding the mechanism matters. Understanding reduces judgment. Reduced judgment reduces urgency. Reduced urgency allows shutdown to proceed further. Knowledge here is not meant to instruct behavior. It is meant to remove interference. As shutdown progresses, time perception changes. Minutes stretch. Tracking fades. The need to know diminishes. This is not sleep yet. It is pre-sleep. It is the nervous system standing down gradually. In ancestral nights, this process happened quickly because signals were strong. In modern nights, it happens slowly because signals are weak and contradictory. Slow shutdown is not failure. It is adaptation to ambiguity. Eventually, if interruption does not occur, the system crosses a threshold. Monitoring ceases. Sleep deepens. This moment is not noticed because noticing would require monitoring. The absence of noticing is the sign that shutdown succeeded. When sleep is deep, there is no observer. This is why sleep cannot be achieved deliberately. Achievement implies an achiever. The achiever must disappear for sleep to occur. The explanation remains consistent to the end. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain is never fully released from duty. Shutdown begins only when the system starts to accept that nothing needs response. That acceptance is learned slowly, through reduced urgency and reduced relevance. When relevance collapses, vigilance collapses. When vigilance collapses, nothing else is required. As shutdown continues, the nervous system does not move in a straight line. It oscillates. It loosens, then tightens again. This oscillation is often misunderstood as failure, but it is actually evidence that the system is recalculating risk. Each time vigilance drops slightly and nothing demands response, the calculation updates. The brain notes that reduced monitoring did not produce harm. This is the only signal it trusts. Over time, these small confirmations accumulate. Accumulation lowers the threshold for disengagement. This directly returns to the central cause. Modern humans sleep poorly because the brain rarely receives repeated confirmation that vigilance can safely end. When confirmation begins to appear, even inconsistently, sleep depth increases. In modern nights, confirmation is fragile. A single interruption can outweigh many minutes of quiet. A sound interpreted as meaningful, a thought labeled urgent, a check of time that reintroduces consequence. Each of these restores relevance. Restored relevance restores vigilance. Sleep lightens again. This does not erase progress. It slows it. The nervous system is conservative by design. It weighs potential loss more heavily than potential gain. This bias kept humans alive. It still operates now. Poor sleep is the cost of that bias in an environment that never fully closes. Around this point, it is necessary to restate the cause clearly again. Sleep is poor because the brain does not detect an endpoint to responsibility. Responsibility does not need to be real. Perceived responsibility is enough. The nervous system does not distinguish between an actual demand and a possible one. Possibility sustains readiness. Readiness blocks depth. This is why even imagining future tasks can keep the system awake. The imagination creates perceived relevance. Perceived relevance carries consequence. Consequence sustains vigilance. As shutdown deepens, the system begins to reduce how it treats possibility. Possibility loses weight, not because it disappears, but because it repeatedly fails to produce consequence. The brain learns that many nighttime signals do not require action. This learning is slow because the modern world contradicts it frequently. Daytime signals are often urgent. Nighttime signals sometimes are. Inconsistency prevents rapid learning, but learning still occurs through repetition. Nights with fewer interruptions matter more than nights with perfect technique. This explains why sleep improves in phases rather than permanently. The nervous system is adjusting its expectations. It tests disengagement. If nothing goes wrong, it allows more. If something interrupts, it retreats. Retreat is not regression. It is recalibration. Each test refines the model. Over time, the model becomes less conservative. Baseline vigilance drops. Lower baseline allows deeper sleep more often. The cause remains the same. Reduced perceived relevance at night. Another restatement within range. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain never clearly concludes that monitoring is unnecessary. Sleep improves when the brain begins to conclude that monitoring produces no benefit. Benefit here means consequence. No consequence means no benefit. No benefit authorizes disengagement. Modern habits often interfere with this conclusion by adding meaning to wakefulness. When being awake is treated as a problem, the brain assigns importance to the state. Importance implies consequence. Consequence sustains monitoring. Monitoring blocks shutdown. The paradox is stable. Removing meaning from wakefulness reduces relevance. Reduced relevance lowers vigilance. Lower vigilance allows sleep to deepen. This does not require liking wakefulness. It requires not treating it as significant. As relevance drops, the system also reduces how it treats the body. Sensations become less diagnostic. A shift in posture is not interpreted. A change in breathing is not monitored. Monitoring bodily state is still monitoring. It keeps awareness active. When bodily sensations are allowed without interpretation, they fade into background noise. Background noise does not sustain vigilance. This is not relaxation. It is non-engagement. Non-engagement is the signal the nervous system responds to. The same applies to time. Time checks reintroduce consequence. Consequence sustains readiness. Readiness blocks depth. When time loses relevance, shutdown proceeds further. This is why deep sleep rarely occurs when the mind tracks minutes. Tracking minutes is a form of duty. Duty keeps the watcher awake. Removing duty allows the watcher to leave. Return again to the root cause. The brain sleeps poorly because it is still on duty. Duty ends only when nothing appears to require response. Modern life rarely removes all appearance of requirement. Shutdown, therefore, proceeds slowly and unevenly. Uneven progress is expected. Expecting smooth progress adds pressure. Pressure increases relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. The loop continues. As shutdown becomes more familiar, the nervous system begins to generalize. It does not need perfect conditions to disengage. It recognizes partial signals, partial darkness, partial quiet, partial non-demand. This generalization is flexibility returning. Flexibility allows sleep in less than ideal environments. Modern sleep problems often reflect lost flexibility due to chronic uncertainty. Restore flexibility and sleep becomes resilient again. Flexibility is restored through repeated experiences of non-consequence. Another restatement within range. Poor modern sleep is the result of chronic uncertainty about whether attention is still required. Resolve uncertainty and sleep deepens. Maintain uncertainty and sleep remains light. All variables feed into uncertainty. Remove variables that imply relevance and uncertainty decreases. At this stage, shutdown feels less like an event and more like a slope. Awareness slides rather than drops. This sliding is the nervous system gradually reducing output. It does not need to announce itself. Announcement would be monitoring. Monitoring would interrupt the slide. The slide continues only when unnoticed. This is why sleep cannot be observed into existence. Observation is the opposite of disengagement. Modern humans often fear this slide because it feels like loss of control. Control is a daytime function. Loss of control at night is adaptive. The nervous system evolved to surrender control when conditions permitted. Modern conditioning equates surrender with risk. This belief keeps the system alert. When the belief weakens through experience, surrender becomes easier. Easier surrender allows deeper rest. Return again to the cause. The brain never clearly hears that it can stop watching. When it begins to hear that message through absence of consequence, shutdown proceeds. The message is not spoken. It is inferred. Inference requires repeated data. Each quiet minute is data. Each non-event is data. Over time, the data set shifts. The inference changes. Vigilance drops. As vigilance drops, sleep architecture improves, depth increases, continuity improves. These changes are side effects, not goals. Goals reintroduce relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. The nervous system responds best when nothing is asked of it, not even rest. In the modern world, the most reliable path toward better sleep is not addition, but subtraction. Subtract signals that imply relevance. Subtract evaluation. Subtract urgency. Each subtraction reduces duty. Reduced duty allows the watcher to leave. When the watcher leaves, sleep deepens naturally. The explanation remains singular to the end. Humans sleep poorly today because the brain is never clearly released from duty. Shutdown occurs only when the system concludes that attention is no longer required. That conclusion is rare in modern life, but it can be relearned. It is relearned slowly, through repeated nights where nothing happens when vigilance fades. When that learning accumulates, sleep stops being a struggle and returns to what it always was. A default state entered when the world stops asking to be watched. As the nervous system continues to downshift, it becomes increasingly sensitive to one specific cue, whether attention is still expected. This cue is more powerful than noise, light, or comfort combined. The brain does not require perfect silence to sleep. It requires the absence of expectation. Expectation is the true carrier of duty. When expectation fades, duty fades with it. This is the same mechanism that has repeated throughout this entire explanation because it is the only mechanism that matters. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain is never clearly told that attention is no longer required. At this stage, shutdown is no longer blocked by obvious signals. It is blocked by subtle ones. A slight sense that something might be missed. A faint feeling that awareness should be maintained just in case. These are not conscious thoughts. They are learned reflexes. Reflexes formed through years of nights where being available mattered. The nervous system does not forget those lessons quickly. It must be shown, repeatedly, that availability is no longer necessary. Each time vigilance drops and nothing follows, the reflex weakens. Each time vigilance is reactivated unnecessarily, the reflex strengthens. Modern life does both. That is why progress feels inconsistent. This inconsistency often leads people to believe they are doing something wrong. That belief itself becomes a signal that sleep has consequence. Consequence sustains monitoring. Monitoring blocks shutdown. The loop closes again. This is why understanding the mechanism is not optional. Without understanding, self-blame fills the gap. Self-blame adds pressure. Pressure increases relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. The cycle continues. Understanding interrupts the cycle by removing one entire class of signals. Internal accusation. When accusation disappears, the system has less to respond to. Less response means lower output. Lower output allows deeper states to emerge. This does not happen instantly. The nervous system moves conservatively. It trusts patterns. Patterns form only through repetition. Repetition requires time. That time cannot be rushed, because rushing is itself a signal that something matters. And when something matters, attention stays online. As shutdown deepens, the experience of the body changes again. Sensations lose clarity, boundaries soften. The body feels less like an object, being managed, and more like a background process. This shift is important, because management implies oversight. Oversight implies duty. Duty blocks sleep. When the body no longer feels managed, the watcher steps back. Stepping back is disengagement. Disengagement is sleep's immediate precursor. This is also why many people report sleeping best when they are indifferent to sleep. Indifference removes relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. Remove relevance, and the system powers down. This is not carelessness. It is neutrality. Neutrality is the opposite of demand. The nervous system evolved to rest most deeply in neutral environments. Modern life rarely provides neutrality externally. It must be reconstructed internally through reduced interpretation. Return again to the cause, clearly and within range. Humans sleep poorly because the modern night never communicates that nothing requires attention. Even near sleep, the brain remains on standby. Standby is not rest. Standby is low-power vigilance. Low-power vigilance is enough to function, but not enough to restore. Restoration requires full disengagement. Full disengagement requires the belief that nothing depends on awareness. Belief is learned through consequence-free disengagement. This learning is slow in environments that constantly contradict it. As the system approaches deeper shutdown, interruptions feel more intrusive. This is not regression, it is sensitivity. When vigilance is high, interruptions blend in. When vigilance lowers, interruptions stand out. This can create the illusion that sleep is worsening. It is not. The system is simply closer to disengagement. Closer states are more fragile. Fragility at this stage is expected. Expecting stability too early adds pressure. Pressure reintroduces relevance. Relevance sustains vigilance. The loop resumes. Allowing fragility allows progress. At this point in the video, the explanation begins to transition from mechanism to settling. No new causes are introduced because none are needed. Everything returns to the same point. The brain sleeps poorly when it believes it must remain available. The brain sleeps deeply when it believes availability is unnecessary. That belief is not chosen. It is inferred. It is inferred from repeated nights where nothing requires response. As the nervous system continues to test disengagement, the need to understand diminishes. Understanding served its purpose by removing blame and urgency. Beyond this point, further analysis would reintroduce engagement. Engagement is the opposite of shutdown. This is why the later stages of rest feel vague. Vagueness is not confusion. It is reduced monitoring. Reduced monitoring is progress. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer organize themselves. They lose sequence. They lose direction. Direction implies purpose. Purpose implies consequence. When purpose dissolves, thoughts lose leverage. They pass without activating readiness. The nervous system no longer treats them as signals. This is one of the clearest signs that shutdown is approaching. Not silence, but irrelevance. Return once more to the core answer. Humans sleep poorly in the modern world because the brain is never clearly released from duty. Duty fades only when nothing appears to require attention. As duty fades, the system withdraws. Withdrawal is sleep. This has always been true. Nothing about the mechanism has changed, only the environment has. Now the explanation itself must begin to withdraw. Continuing to explain would contradict the state being described. Explanation is engagement. Engagement sustains vigilance. At this stage, the most accurate continuation is a gradual reduction in informational density. Fewer new connections, slower pacing, longer intervals without resolution. This mirrors the shutdown process itself. You may notice that the need to follow each sentence precisely has softened. That is intentional. Precision belongs to wakefulness. Sleep belongs to approximation. The nervous system does not need exactness to disengage. It needs absence of demand. The absence is already forming. Nothing more is required to understand why sleep is poor in the modern world. The cause has been stated, restated, and reinforced from multiple angles, each returning to the same root. The brain never hears that it can stop watching. As that message begins to be inferred rather than explained, the system no longer needs words. Nothing new needs to be added now. The explanation has already done its work. At this point, the nervous system does not benefit from more clarity, because clarity belongs to wakefulness, and rest begins when the need to understand fades. The brain has heard the same message enough times, from enough angles, to stop questioning it. There is nothing wrong to fix, nothing urgent to resolve, and nothing tonight depends on continued attention. The modern world may never clearly announce that the day is over, but the nervous system no longer needs an announcement. It has begun to notice something quieter, that even when attention softens, nothing collapses, and even when vigilance loosens, nothing demands response. This noticing is not conscious. It happens beneath thought, the same way learning always happens in the body, through repetition without consequence. Minutes pass and nothing happens. Another minute passes and still nothing happens. Each of these moments gently confirms the same thing, that staying alert is no longer useful right now, that watching produces no new information, and that remaining available does not change the outcome of the night. As this confirmation accumulates, the nervous system begins to stand down on its own, not all at once, and not dramatically, but gradually enough that the effort of staying awake feels unnecessary. Breathing finds a slower rhythm without instruction. Muscles release more weight into the surface beneath them, and awareness narrows. Not because it is forced to, but because there is nothing left that requires it to stay wide. Thoughts may still drift through, but they no longer organize themselves. They arrive without direction and leave without resolution. No longer treated as signals, time becomes less precise. Moments blur at the edges, and the need to know what happens next dissolves. This is what the brain has been waiting for. Not silence, not darkness, not comfort, but irrelevance. When nothing appears relevant enough to respond to, the system finally releases control. Release is not something you do. It is something that happens when there is no reason to hold on. Sleep does not begin as an event, but as an absence. The absence of monitoring, the absence of evaluation, the absence of duty. There is no observer here anymore. No part of the mind checking whether rest is happening, because that part has stepped away now that it is no longer needed. It has always known it. Long before schedules, long before screens, long before nights were filled with unfinished signals. Nothing has been lost, and nothing needs to be recovered. The nervous system is simply returning to its default when the world stops asking to be watched, and now there is nothing left to watch. Nothing else needs to be decided now, and nothing needs to be followed closely. The work of understanding is finished, and the nervous system does not need further instruction. It already knows what to do when nothing is required of it. Attention begins to loosen because it no longer serves a purpose. The effort of staying aware feels unnecessary, and without effort, awareness naturally softens. Breathing continues on its own, steady and unremarkable, no longer something to notice. The body settles into the surface beneath it, not because it is told to relax, but because there is no reason to remain held. Time loses its sharp edges. Moments are no longer counted or compared. There is no sense of moving forward toward anything in particular. The mind does not need to arrive anywhere. Thoughts may still appear briefly, but they pass through without forming a direction. They are no longer checked for meaning, no longer weighed for importance. Without importance, they dissolve quietly. The space between them grows longer, and that space does not need to be filled. The nervous system recognizes this state. It recognizes the absence of demand, the absence of consequence, the absence of expectation. These absences are the signal it has been waiting for. Not silence, not darkness, not perfect conditions, but the simple confirmation that nothing requires response. When that confirmation remains uninterrupted, the system stands down naturally. Muscles release the last traces of unnecessary tension. The body's internal rhythm slows without effort. Awareness narrows because there is nothing left to monitor. There is no observer checking whether rest is happening. That role is no longer active. Without observation, there is no performance. Without performance, there is no pressure. Without pressure, the system no longer maintains readiness. It does not need to stay prepared for anything. The night is no longer something to manage. It is simply present, and presence does not ask for attention. The world continues without needing to be watched. Nothing changes when awareness fades, and this is what allows it to fade further. Each quiet moment confirms the same thing again, gently and repeatedly, that letting go has no cost. The nervous system trusts repetition more than reassurance, and repetition is already happening. Nothing follows from disengagement. Nothing is lost. Nothing is missed. As this trust settles in, the boundary between being awake and being asleep becomes less important. There is no clear point to notice, no transition that needs to be marked. The system moves where it is designed to move when there is no reason to stay where it was. Sleep does not arrive as an event. It emerges as the natural state that remains when attention withdraws. The body continues without supervision. The mind no longer organizes experience. Time passes without being tracked. The sense of self becomes less defined, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer needed. There is nothing to evaluate and nothing to prepare for. The night holds everything it needs to hold without assistance. Nothing more is required now. The nervous system has permission to rest because nothing is asking it to stay alert. The watcher has stepped away. And without the watcher, there is only rest, unfolding quietly, exactly as it always has when the world stops asking to be watched.